Sarah Martinez had dreamed of becoming a Navy SEAL since she was 12 years old, watching her father clean his service rifle on their kitchen table after another deployment. The smell of gun oil and the precise way he handled each component fascinated her more than any doll or dress ever could. Her father, Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez, had served 3 tours in Afghanistan with the Army Rangers, and Sarah hung on every carefully chosen word he shared about his experiences. Growing up in a small town in Texas, Sarah was the girl who outran every boy in her high school track team, who could field dress a deer faster than her older brothers, and who spent her summers learning marksmanship from her grandfather, a Korean War veteran. While other teenagers were at parties, Sarah was at the shooting range, methodically working to improve her accuracy and speed. Her bedroom walls were covered not with posters of celebrities, but with military insignia, tactical diagrams, and photos of her father with his unit. When Sarah turned 18, she enlisted in the Navy with one clear goal in mind. She excelled through boot camp, surprising even the toughest drill instructors with her determination and skill. Her shooting scores were consistently in the top percentile, her physical fitness tests were flawless, and her tactical thinking impressed her superiors. But every time she expressed interest in special operations, she was met with the same response. Women weren't allowed in combat roles, especially not in the SEALs. Years passed as Sarah served with distinction in various Navy roles. She became an expert in communications, earned commendations for her service aboard destroyers, and completed advanced training programs that few sailors ever attempted. But the dream never faded. She watched as policies slowly began to change, as barriers fell one by one. When the military finally opened combat positions to women, Sarah immediately submitted her application for SEAL training. The rejection letter arrived 3 weeks later. Not qualified. Insufficient experience in direct combat operations. The words felt like physical blows. Sarah's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander James Rodriguez, found her later that day sitting alone in the ship's armory, staring at her rifle with tears she refused to let fall. "Martinez," he said quietly, pulling up a chair beside her. "I heard about the letter." Sarah didn't look up. 5 years I've been preparing for this, sir. 5 years of perfect scores, perfect evaluations, perfect everything. But it's still not enough because I haven't had the chance to prove myself in combat. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. Sarah had served under him for 2 years, and he'd never seen anyone more dedicated or skilled. He'd watched her outshoot Marines at joint training exercises, seen her remain calm under pressure that broke seasoned sailors, and witnessed her natural leadership abilities during crisis situations. An idea began forming in his mind, one that could change everything. "What if I told you there might be another way?" he said finally. Sarah looked up for the first time, hope flickering in her dark eyes. "What do you mean, sir?" "There's a joint training exercise coming up in 3 months. SEAL Team 6 will be working with several Navy units on advanced sniper and reconnaissance scenarios. They'll need support personnel for target acquisition and elimination drills." Rodriguez paused, choosing his words carefully. "I might be able to get you assigned to that detail." The hope in Sarah's chest grew stronger. "But, sir, that's not the same as SEAL training." "No, it's not. But it would put you in direct contact with the team. And if you could prove your abilities in front of them, in a real training scenario." He let the implication hang in the air. Sarah's mind raced. It wasn't official SEAL training, but it was an opportunity. A chance to show what she could do. "What would I need to do?" "The exercise involves long-range precision shooting under extreme conditions. We're talking targets at distances that would challenge even experienced snipers, in weather conditions that will test every skill you've learned. The SEALs will be evaluating all support personnel to see who might be suitable for future special operations roles." Rodriguez leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Sarah, I'm going to be honest with you. This isn't going to be easy. The team you'll be working with, they're not expecting much from Navy support personnel. They certainly aren't expecting anything from a woman. If you mess this up, if you can't perform at their level, it won't just end your SEAL dreams. It could end your entire military career." Sarah felt her father's voice in her head, words he'd spoken to her years ago. "Mija, in this life, you only get a few chances to prove who you really are. When those chances come, you better be ready to give everything you have." She looked Rodriguez in the eye, her voice steady and determined. "I'll do it, sir. Whatever it takes." The next 3 months were a blur of preparation unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. She convinced her unit's master-at-arms to let her use the ship's small arms locker for extra practice sessions, often shooting until her shoulder ached and her hands cramped. She studied ballistics tables until she could calculate wind drift and bullet drop in her sleep. She ran miles every morning before dawn, carrying increasingly heavy packs to build the endurance she'd need for extended missions. Most importantly, she practiced shooting under stress. Sarah would sprint to exhaustion, then immediately take precision shots at maximum range. She practiced in rain, in darkness, and in simulated combat scenarios where other sailors would create distractions and noise around her. By the time the exercise approached, Sarah could consistently hit targets at 800 meters while her heart rate was still elevated from physical exertion. The training facility was located on a remote island off the coast of California, a place where the military could conduct live-fire exercises without civilian interference. As Sarah stepped off the transport helicopter, she got her first close look at the legendary SEAL Team 6. 12 of the most elite warriors in the American military stood in formation, their faces hidden behind tactical sunglasses, their posture radiating confidence and barely contained aggression. Team leader Chief Petty Officer Marcus Stone stepped forward as the support personnel assembled. He was a giant of a man, easily 6 feet 4 inches tall, with arms like tree trunks and scars visible on his neck and hands. His reputation preceded him. 15 years in special operations, multiple deployments to the most dangerous regions in the world, and a legendary ability to make impossible shots under pressure. "Listen up," Stone's voice carried across the group without him raising it. "For the next 2 weeks, you'll be supporting advanced training exercises designed to push the limits of human performance. This isn't summer camp. This isn't regular Navy training. This is preparation for scenarios where failure means people die." His eyes swept across the assembled sailors, lingering for just a moment on Sarah. She kept her expression neutral, her posture military perfect, but she felt the weight of his evaluation. The primary exercise will test long-range precision shooting under extreme conditions. We've set up 100 targets at various distances and elevations throughout this island. Some are as close as 300 meters. Others are over 1,500 meters away, which is beyond the effective range of most military rifles. Weather conditions will vary from clear skies to simulated storms with winds exceeding 40 miles per hour. Stone began walking slowly in front of the group, his boots crunching on the gravel. Each participant will have one opportunity to engage all 100 targets. 1 shot per target. No do-overs, no second chances. In real combat, you don't get to try again if you miss. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but not from fear, from excitement. This was what she'd been training for her entire adult life. "The current record for this exercise," Stone continued, "is held by Petty Officer First Class David Thompson from SEAL Team 3. He successfully engaged 87 out of 100 targets under optimal weather conditions." Stone stopped walking and faced the group directly. "We don't expect any of you to come close to that number. If you can hit 50 targets, you'll be performing better than most Marines. If you hit 60, you'll be performing at the level of an average SEAL." One of the other sailors raised his hand. "Chief, what happens if someone actually beats the record?" Stone's expression didn't change, but Sarah caught a slight smile at the corner of his mouth. "Son, that's not going to happen. But if it did, that person would receive serious consideration for special operations training, regardless of their current MOS or background." That evening, Sarah sat alone in her assigned quarters, cleaning her rifle and mentally preparing for the challenge ahead. The weapon was an M24 sniper weapon system, the same rifle she'd trained with for years. She knew every component, every adjustment, every quirk of its behavior. But knowing her equipment and successfully using it under pressure were two different things. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Petty Officer Second Class Jake Morrison, one of the other support personnel assigned to the exercise. Morrison was a good sailor and a decent marksman, but Sarah had outshot him consistently during their joint training sessions. "Hey, Martinez," he said, stepping into her room uninvited. "I wanted to talk to you about tomorrow." "What about it?" Morrison seemed uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Look, I don't want this to sound wrong, but I think you should consider withdrawing from the shooting exercise." Sarah's hands stilled on her rifle. "Excuse me. It's just that this is a really high-visibility situation. The SEALs are going to be watching everything we do. If you don't perform well, it doesn't just reflect on you. It reflects on all of us, on our unit, on the Navy's decision to let women into these programs." The room fell silent except for the distant sound of waves hitting the shore. Sarah set down her cleaning supplies and looked Morrison directly in the eye. "Are you suggesting I'm going to fail because I'm a woman?" No, that's not what I mean," Morrison said quickly, but his tone suggested that was exactly what he meant. "It's just that this is about more than individual performance. There are politics involved here. If the first woman to attempt this exercise doesn't do well, it could set back opportunities for other women for years." Sarah stood up slowly, her full height still several inches shorter than Morrison, but her presence suddenly seeming to fill the room. "Jake, I appreciate your concern, but I didn't come here to represent all women in the military. I came here to represent myself, and I plan to succeed." Morrison opened his mouth to argue further, but something in Sarah's expression stopped him. He mumbled a good night and left, closing the door behind him. Alone again, Sarah returned to her rifle maintenance, but her mind was churning. Morrison wasn't entirely wrong about the politics. She would be under more scrutiny than any of the men. Every shot would be analyzed not just for its accuracy, but for what it said about women's capabilities in combat roles. The pressure was enormous. But pressure was something Sarah had learned to use, not fight against. Her father had taught her that pressure could crush you or forge you into something stronger. Her grandfather had told her stories of Korean War battles where the pressure of enemy fire helped him focus and make impossible shots. Pressure was just another tool, and Sarah intended to master it. The next morning dawned gray and windy, with clouds threatening rain. Perfect conditions for the kind of challenging exercise the SEALs had designed. Sarah joined the other participants for a pre-mission briefing, where they received detailed maps of the island showing target locations, elevation changes, and potential shooting positions. Chief Stone addressed the group one final time before the exercise began. "You'll be going out in pairs for safety reasons, but each shooter works alone. You have 8 hours to engage all 100 targets. That might seem like plenty of time, but remember that you'll be hiking across difficult terrain while carrying full gear. Time management is part of the test." He handed each participant a GPS device and a scorecard. Every target is equipped with electronic sensors that will register hits and transmit the data back to our monitoring station. We'll know immediately if you hit or miss, and we'll know exactly where your bullet impacted. Sarah checked her gear one final time. Rifle, ammunition, scope covers, rangefinder, weather meter, water, and emergency supplies. Everything was in perfect order, just as it had been the dozen times she'd checked it since dawn. "Martinez," Stone's voice called out as the group prepared to move to their starting positions. "You're with Petty Officer Morrison." Sarah nodded and fell into step beside Morrison, who still seemed uncomfortable about their conversation the previous evening. As they walked toward their assigned sector of the island, Morrison finally spoke. "Look, about last night. I didn't mean to sound like I don't think you can do this." "Yes, you did," Sarah replied calmly, adjusting her pack straps. "But that's okay. You're not the first person to doubt me, and you won't be the last. I'm used to it." They reached their starting point, a rocky outcrop overlooking a valley filled with target positions. Sarah immediately began studying the terrain through her scope, identifying shooting positions and calculating distances. Morrison did the same, but Sarah noticed his movements were less methodical, more hurried. The exercise began at exactly 0800 hours. Sarah's first target was positioned 650 meters away on a hillside across the valley. She settled into a prone shooting position, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger. The target's sensor immediately flashed green, indicating a hit. Target number 2 was more challenging, 890 meters away, partially obscured by vegetation, with a crosswind that would push her bullet off course. Sarah adjusted her scope, calculated the wind drift, and fired. Another green light. By noon, Sarah had successfully engaged 47 targets, missing only 3. Morrison was struggling more, having hit 31 targets and missed 12. The terrain was proving more challenging than either of them had expected, and the weather was getting worse as storm clouds gathered overhead. As they approached target 55, positioned on a distant ridge at nearly 1,200 meters away, Morrison stopped climbing and sat down heavily on a rock. "I'm done," he said, breathing hard. "I can't make that shot in these conditions. The wind is gusting too hard, and I can barely see the target through the rain." Sarah looked at the target through her scope. Morrison was right. It was an extremely difficult shot. The target was barely visible through the rain and mist, and the wind was strong enough to push her bullet off course by several feet. But she'd practiced in conditions like this. She'd prepared for exactly this scenario. "I'm going to try it," she said, settling into position behind her rifle. "Sarah, don't. If you miss, it'll hurt your overall score. You're doing great so far. Don't risk it on an impossible shot." But Sarah was already in her shooting zone, the state of focused concentration where everything except the target and her rifle disappeared. She felt the wind patterns, calculated the bullet's trajectory, and found the perfect moment of stillness between gusts. The shot rang out across the valley. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, through the rain and mist, target 55 flashed green. Morrison stared in disbelief. "How the hell did you make that shot?" Sarah was already shouldering her pack, preparing to move to the next position. "Practice," she said simply. As the day wore on, word began to spread among the SEAL observers about the support sailor who was hitting targets that experienced snipers would struggle with. Chief Stone found himself checking the electronic monitoring system more frequently, watching Sarah's progression through the course with growing interest. By 1600 hours, with 2 hours remaining in the exercise, Sarah had attempted 83 targets and missed only 7. She was on pace to not just beat the existing record, but to shatter it. More importantly, she was doing it under some of the worst weather conditions the island had seen all year. The final 17 targets were positioned in the most challenging locations on the island: extreme distances, difficult angles, and positions that required precise shooting while lying in uncomfortable positions on rocky outcrops. These were the targets that separated good shooters from exceptional ones. Target 84 was positioned 1,450 meters away, near the maximum effective range of her rifle. The rain had intensified, and crosswinds were gusting up to 35 miles per hour. Sarah studied the target for several minutes, calculating not just the distance and wind, but also the trajectory needed to account for the significant elevation difference between her position and the target. She had one shot, one chance to prove that she belonged among the elite warriors who were watching her every move through high-powered spotting scopes from the monitoring station. Sarah settled behind her rifle, controlled her breathing, and found that perfect moment of calm that existed between heartbeats. The world narrowed to just her rifle, and a target that most marksmen would consider impossible to hit. The trigger broke cleanly, and the rifle recoiled against her shoulder. Through the rain and wind, target 84 flashed green. Back at the monitoring station, the SEAL team members who had been casually observing the exercise suddenly became very interested in what they were seeing. Sarah Martinez, a Navy communications specialist from Texas, was shooting better than any of them had ever seen a non-SEAL shoot. She was hitting targets that would challenge members of their own team. Chief Stone picked up his radio and called his commanding officer. "Sir, you need to see this. We might have found something special." With only 13 targets remaining and less than 2 hours left in the exercise, Sarah faced her most challenging shots yet. Target 85 was positioned on a steep cliff face 1,520 meters away, requiring her to shoot at an extreme upward angle while compensating for the wind shear created by the cliff itself. The rain had turned into a steady downpour, and her equipment was soaked despite her best efforts to keep it dry. Sarah found a stable shooting position wedged between 2 large rocks, using her pack to create a steady rest for her rifle. Through her scope, the target appeared as little more than a dark shape against the gray rock face. At this distance, with these conditions, even a perfect shot would require an element of luck. She took her time, waiting for a brief lull in the wind. When it came, she fired. The bullet's path seemed to take forever, arcing high through the rain before finding its mark. Target 85 flashed green, and Sarah allowed herself a small smile. 98 targets attempted, only 7 misses. Meanwhile, back at the monitoring station, the atmosphere had completely changed. What had started as a routine observation of support personnel had become something unprecedented. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez had been called to the station to watch his sailors' performance, and he stood beside Chief Stone, both men studying the electronic tracking data in amazement. "Chief," Rodriguez said quietly, "in 20 years of service, I've never seen shooting like this. Not from Marines, not from Army Rangers, not from anyone." Stone nodded grimly. "She's not just beating our record, sir. She's destroying it. And she's doing it in conditions that would challenge our best snipers." He paused, watching as Sarah's position appeared on the tracking map, moving toward target 86. "The question is, what do we do about it?" The implications were enormous. If a Navy communications specialist could outshoot SEAL team members, what did that say about their selection standards? More importantly, how could they justify continuing to exclude someone with this level of skill from special operations training? "Have you been watching her technique?" asked Petty Officer Thompson, the SEAL whose record Sarah was breaking. There was no resentment in his voice, only professional admiration. "She's not just lucky. Every movement is deliberate, every shot is calculated. She's reading the wind patterns better than I could in these conditions." Captain William Hayes, the commanding officer of SEAL Team 6, had arrived at the monitoring station an hour earlier after receiving Stone's call. He stood silently watching the displays, his expression unreadable. Hayes was a legend in special operations circles, a man who had served in every major conflict for the past 2 decades, and whose judgment was respected throughout the military. "Sir," Stone said carefully, "what are your thoughts on this situation?" Hayes continued watching the monitors for a long moment before responding. "My thoughts are that we're witnessing something exceptional. The question is whether we're prepared to act on what we're seeing." Out on the course, Sarah was approaching target 86, unaware of the discussion her performance was generating. The target was positioned 1,380 meters away across a deep ravine, requiring a shot that would test every aspect of her training. The wind patterns in the ravine were unpredictable, swirling and changing direction constantly as air currents bounced off the rocky walls. Sarah studied the area through her scope, watching grass and debris blow in different directions at various points along the bullet's projected path. This wasn't just a long-range shot. It was a puzzle that required understanding how wind patterns changed with terrain features. She'd studied this type of challenge in theory, but had never attempted it in practice. Taking a prone position at the edge of the ravine, Sarah spent several minutes observing wind patterns, noting how they changed at different elevations and distances. She made minute adjustments to her scope, accounting not just for distance and elevation, but for the complex wind patterns that would affect her bullet's flight. When she fired, the bullet's path carried it across the ravine in what seemed like an impossible arc, compensating for wind that changed direction 3 times during its flight. Target 86 flashed green, and Sarah heard a faint cheer echo across the valley from the monitoring station. She didn't know it, but that cheer had come from Petty Officer Thompson, who had just watched her make a shot that he wasn't sure he could have made himself. As Sarah moved toward target 87, her radio crackled to life. "Martinez, this is Chief Stone. What's your current status?" "Chief, I'm at 99 targets attempted, 7 misses. Moving to engage target 87 now, sir." There was a long pause before Stone responded. "Martinez, I want you to know that you're currently performing at a level that exceeds our expectations. Whatever happens with the remaining targets, you should be proud of what you've accomplished." Sarah felt a surge of emotion at the unexpected praise, but she pushed it down. She couldn't afford to get emotional now, not with 11 targets left and the chance of a lifetime within reach. Target 87 was positioned 1,290 meters away on a steep hillside covered in loose scree. The shooting position was unstable, and Sarah had to be careful not to disturb the loose rocks that could shift and throw off her shot. She wedged herself between 2 boulders and used her pack to create a stable platform. The shot was clean, the target flashed green, and Sarah was one step closer to completing something that no support personnel had ever accomplished. But the physical and mental demands of the day were taking their toll. Her shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil, her hands were cramped from gripping wet equipment, and she was exhausted from hours of hiking across difficult terrain while carrying full gear. Target 88 required a 1,610-meter shot across a valley filled with swirling mist from the storm. Sarah could barely see the target through her scope, and the wind was gusting unpredictably. She took 3 different shooting positions before finding one that felt stable, then waited for nearly 10 minutes for conditions to improve. When she finally fired, she wasn't certain the shot would connect. The target was invisible through the mist for several seconds before it flashed green. Sarah allowed herself a moment of relief, then immediately began moving toward Target 89. At the monitoring station, the mood had shifted from amazement to something approaching awe. Sarah had now hit 92 out of 99 targets attempted, a performance that exceeded anything in SEAL records. More importantly, she had done it while maintaining the kind of tactical movement and fieldcraft that demonstrated a natural understanding of combat operations. "Captain," Chief Stone said to Hayes, "I need to ask directly. If she completes this exercise successfully, what are your intentions regarding her status?" Hayes studied the displays showing Sarah's progress toward the final targets. "Chief, I've been asking myself the same question for the past 2 hours. What I'm seeing challenges some fundamental assumptions about selection and training." Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez leaned forward. "Sir, with respect, I don't think this should be about assumptions. This should be about performance. And her performance speaks for itself." "I agree," Hayes said. "But you have to understand the broader implications. If we recommend Sarah Martinez for SEAL training based on this performance, it sets a precedent. It means we're acknowledging that our current selection standards may be missing exceptional candidates." The conversation was interrupted by Morrison's voice on the radio. He had abandoned the exercise hours earlier, managing to hit only 63 targets before deciding the conditions were too challenging to continue. "This is Morrison. I can see Martinez's position from here. She's approaching the final cluster of targets, but the weather is getting worse. Wind speeds are increasing, and visibility is dropping fast." Target 89 was positioned at an extreme range of 1,670 meters, near the absolute limit of what her rifle could achieve. The target was barely visible through the rain and mist, appearing as little more than a faint shadow against the rocky hillside. Sarah knew this shot would require not just technical skill, but an element of faith in her training and equipment. She found a shooting position that offered the best available stability and protection from the wind. Through her scope, she could barely make out the target outline. At this range, with these conditions, the margin of error was almost non-existent. A slight miscalculation in wind speed or direction, a minor inconsistency in her shooting form, or simply bad luck could cause the bullet to miss by several feet. Sarah controlled her breathing, found her natural point of aim, and waited for the perfect moment. When it came, she squeezed the trigger with the smooth, consistent pressure she'd practiced thousands of times. The bullet's flight time at this distance was nearly 2 seconds, long enough for doubt to creep in, long enough to wonder if she'd made the right calculations. Target 89 flashed green, and Sarah felt a surge of emotion that she quickly suppressed. 2 targets left. Target 90 was positioned 1,450 meters away, but the challenge wasn't just distance. The target was located behind a gap in the rocks, visible only from a very specific angle and only for part of its surface. Sarah would have to position herself precisely and make a shot that threaded the needle between rock formations. After studying the target area for several minutes, Sarah found the one shooting position that offered a clear line of sight to the target. The position was uncomfortable, requiring her to shoot from an awkward angle while lying on uneven rocks, but it was the only option. The shot required absolute precision not just in aim, but in timing. Sarah had to fire when the target was in the brief window of visibility between the rock formations. She settled behind her rifle, found her aim point, and waited for the perfect moment. The shot was perfect. Target 90 flashed green, and Sarah was one target away from completing the most challenging marksmanship exercise in SEAL training with a performance that would shatter every existing record. At the monitoring station, the tension was palpable. Everyone present understood they were witnessing something historic. Sarah Martinez, a Navy communications specialist who had been denied SEAL training because she lacked combat experience, was about to complete a challenge that would prove her skills exceeded those of most SEALs. "Captain," Chief Stone said, "regardless of what happens with the final target, I think we have our answer about her qualifications." Hayes nodded slowly. "I think you're right, Chief. The question is what we do with that answer." Target 100 was the most challenging shot on the entire course, positioned 1,720 meters away on a ridge that required Sarah to shoot across two valleys while accounting for complex wind patterns and extreme elevation changes. It was a shot that had defeated every other participant who had attempted the exercise, including several SEAL team members who had tried the course in perfect weather conditions. Sarah reached the designated shooting area with 20 minutes left in the exercise. Through her scope, Target 100 appeared as a tiny speck on a distant ridge, barely visible even at maximum magnification. The wind was howling across the valleys, creating updrafts and downdrafts that would make trajectory calculation almost impossible. She spent 10 minutes studying the shot, using every technique she'd learned to read the wind patterns and terrain features. This wasn't just about marksmanship anymore. It was about understanding ballistics, meteorology, and physics at an almost intuitive level. Sarah found the best available shooting position and settled behind her rifle for the final time. Through her scope, Target 100 seemed impossibly distant, impossibly small, impossibly challenging. But she'd come too far to give up now. She controlled her breathing, made her final adjustments, and found that perfect moment of stillness that existed between heartbeats and wind gusts. Everything she'd trained for, everything she'd dreamed of, came down to this one shot. The trigger broke cleanly, the rifle recoiled, and the bullet began its long journey across the valleys toward Target 100. For nearly 3 seconds, Sarah watched through her scope as the bullet arced through the rain and wind toward its destination. The impact was invisible through the storm conditions, but after what seemed like an eternity, Target 100 flashed green. Sarah had done it. 100 targets attempted, 93 hits, 7 misses. She had not only beaten the existing SEAL record, she had demolished it under the worst weather conditions the course had ever seen. At the monitoring station, silence reigned for a full minute as everyone absorbed what they had witnessed. Finally, Captain Hayes picked up his radio. "Martinez, this is Captain Hayes. Return to base immediately for debriefing." As Sarah gathered her equipment and began the long hike back to the base camp, she had no idea that her life was about to change forever. She had proven herself beyond any doubt. But the real test was just beginning. The military bureaucracy, politics, and institutional resistance she would face in the coming weeks would prove more challenging than any target she had faced on the course. But, for now, walking through the storm with her rifle slung across her shoulder, Sarah Martinez allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had given everything she had, and it had been enough. Behind her, Target 100 continued to flash green in the rain, a small electronic beacon announcing that something extraordinary had just happened on a remote island off the coast of California. A woman had just proven that excellence knows no gender, that determination can overcome any obstacle, and that sometimes the most unexpected people are capable of the most extraordinary things. The debriefing room was stark and windowless, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that cast sharp shadows across the gray walls. Sarah sat at a metal table, still wearing her wet combat gear, facing a panel of officers whose expressions ranged from curiosity to barely concealed skepticism. Captain Hayes sat at the center, flanked by Chief Stone and 2 other SEAL team leaders Sarah didn't recognize. For the first 10 minutes, nobody spoke. They simply reviewed the electronic data from her performance, cross-referencing hit confirmations with weather reports and target difficulty ratings. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, broken only by the sound of pages turning and keyboards clicking. Finally, Captain Hayes looked up from his tablet. "Petty Officer Martinez, what you accomplished today was unprecedented. 93 confirmed hits out of 100 targets, under extreme weather conditions, represents the highest score ever recorded on this exercise. Sarah kept her expression neutral, though inside her heart was racing. "Thank you, sir." However, Hayes continued, his tone becoming more formal. Exceptional performance in one area doesn't automatically qualify someone for special operations training. SEAL candidates must demonstrate proficiency across multiple domains: physical conditioning, mental resilience, team integration, and leadership under extreme stress. Chief Stone leaned forward. "Martinez, what made you think you could outperform seasoned military marksmen on this exercise?" The question was clearly a test, designed to see if success had made her arrogant or overconfident. Sarah chose her words carefully. "I didn't think about outperforming anyone, Chief. I focused on each individual target, each individual shot. I prepared extensively and executed my training to the best of my ability." "But you must have had some confidence in your abilities," pressed Commander Lisa Park, one of the officers Sarah didn't recognize. "Otherwise, why attempt such a challenging exercise?" "Ma'am, confidence and preparation are different things. I was confident in my preparation, not necessarily in the outcome. Every shot could have gone wrong despite perfect technique. I just tried to give each target the respect it deserved." Hayes nodded slightly, making notes on his tablet. "Tell us about your background. What led you to develop this level of marksmanship skill?" For the next hour, Sarah recounted her story. Growing up in Texas, learning from her father and grandfather, her years of dedication to improving her shooting skills, her previous attempts to join special operations, and her determination to prove herself despite repeated rejections. She spoke honestly about her motivations, her preparation for this exercise, and her long-term goals. Throughout her account, the officers asked probing questions designed to test her knowledge, her attitude, and her psychological readiness for the demands of SEAL training. They wanted to know how she handled failure, how she responded to criticism, how she worked with teams, and how she made decisions under pressure. "Martinez," Chief Stone said during a brief break, "I want to be direct with you. Your shooting performance today was remarkable, but marksmanship is just one component of what we do. SEALs operate in small teams under extreme conditions where split-second decisions can mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. How do we know you can handle that kind of pressure?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Chief, with respect, you don't know that. Just like you don't know it about any candidate until they're tested. What you do know is that I've demonstrated the ability to perform under pressure in one critical area. That should at least earn me the chance to be tested in others." The directness of her response seemed to surprise some of the officers, but Hayes nodded approvingly. "Fair answer. What do you think SEAL training would be like for you specifically?" "Harder than it is for most candidates, sir. I'll face additional scrutiny because I'm a woman. I'll have to prove myself not just as a potential SEAL, but as evidence that the decision to allow women into special operations was correct. That's extra pressure, but it's not pressure I can't handle." Commander Park leaned back in her chair. "Some would argue that kind of additional pressure makes you a liability, that the political aspects of your candidacy could distract from unit cohesion and mission focus." Sarah felt a flash of anger, but controlled it carefully. "Ma'am, every SEAL carries the weight of representing their unit, their service, and their country. I'm willing to carry additional weight if it means earning the right to serve at this level. And I'd argue that my performance today suggests I can handle pressure rather than be crushed by it." The questioning continued for another 2 hours, covering everything from her technical knowledge of special operations procedures to her personal philosophy about warfare and military service. The officers seemed determined to find some weakness, some flaw that would justify denying her the opportunity she'd earned through her performance. Finally, Hayes called for a recess. "Martinez, wait outside while we deliberate." Sarah spent the next 90 minutes sitting in a sterile hallway, her mind cycling through every question she'd answered and every response she'd given. She tried to read meaning into the officers' expressions and tone, but their professional demeanor had revealed nothing about their thoughts or intentions. When she was finally called back into the room, the atmosphere had changed. The officers looked tired, and there was a tension in the air that hadn't been present before. Hayes spoke without preamble. Petty Officer Martinez, after extensive discussion, we've reached a decision regarding your status and future opportunities. Sarah felt her chest tighten, but she kept her expression neutral. Your performance today was extraordinary by any measure. You demonstrated technical proficiency that exceeds many of our current team members, and you did so under conditions that would challenge our most experienced operators. Hayes paused, consulting his notes. However, there are institutional and practical considerations that complicate the situation. SEAL training has a very specific structure and timeline. Current classes are already filled, and adding a candidate mid-cycle would disrupt established training schedules. Sarah felt her heart sinking, recognizing the careful language that typically preceded a rejection. Additionally, Commander Park interjected, there are questions about integration challenges that would need to be addressed before any woman could be successfully incorporated into SEAL training. Housing, equipment modifications, adjusted physical standards. These issues require careful planning. Chief Stone cleared his throat. That said, we cannot ignore what we witnessed today. Your shooting was not just good, it was exceptional. The kind of natural ability combined with dedicated training that we rarely see at any level. Hayes nodded and looked directly at Sarah. Therefore, we're prepared to make you an offer. Not for immediate SEAL training, but for assignment to a special operations support role where you could develop additional skills while contributing to active missions. Sarah kept her expression neutral, though inside she was screaming. After everything she'd proven, they were still offering her a support role rather than the actual training she'd earned. The position would involve advanced reconnaissance and sniper support for SEAL operations, Hayes continued. You would work directly with teams in the field, using your marksmanship skills in real-world scenarios. It would provide you with combat experience and exposure to special operations procedures. And after that assignment? Sarah asked carefully. After that assignment, depending on your performance and changing institutional policies, you would be reconsidered for direct SEAL training. The room fell silent again. Sarah understood what was being offered, a chance to prove herself further, but not the immediate recognition her performance deserved. It was progress, but not justice. How long would this support assignment last? She asked. Minimum 18 months, possibly longer depending on operational requirements and policy developments. Sarah felt the weight of the decision. She could accept this compromise and hope that further proving herself would eventually lead to full SEAL training. Or she could reject it and return to regular Navy duties, potentially ending any chance of special operations service. But there was a third option, one that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. With respect, sir, I need to decline your offer. The silence that followed was deafening. Hayes stared at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I said I need to decline your offer, Captain. I appreciate the opportunity, but I didn't come here to be a support specialist. I came here to be a SEAL. Chief Stone's face darkened. Martinez, do you understand what you're turning down? This is a rare opportunity that most sailors would kill for. I understand exactly what I'm turning down, Chief. But I also understand what I proved today. I outperformed every previous candidate on the most challenging exercise in SEAL training. If that doesn't earn me the right to actual SEAL training, then no amount of support assignments ever will. Commander Park leaned forward aggressively. So what exactly are you proposing, Petty Officer? Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would either change everything or end her military career. I'm proposing that you give me a chance to attempt actual SEAL training with the next available class. Not as a political statement, not as an experiment, but as a candidate who has demonstrated the skills necessary to succeed. And if you fail? Hayes asked quietly. Then, I fail on my own merits, the same as any other candidate. But at least I'll have been given the chance to fail or succeed based on my actual capabilities rather than assumptions about my limitations. The room erupted in muted conversations between the officers. Sarah caught fragments of heated discussion about precedent, policy, and practical considerations. After several minutes, Hayes called for order. Martinez, what you're asking for is not a simple matter. There are regulations, protocols, institutional considerations. Captain, Sarah interrupted, something she'd never done with a superior officer before. With respect, Those are your problems to solve, not mine. My problem was proving I belonged here. I solved my problem today. The boldness of her statement shocked everyone, including Sarah herself. But she'd come too far to back down now. Chief Stone stared at her for a long moment before speaking. You realize you're gambling your entire military career on this position? Yes, Chief, I do. But some things are worth gambling everything for. Hayes looked around the table at his fellow officers, then back at Sarah. Give us 10 minutes to confer privately. Sarah waited in the hallway again, but this time the minutes crawled by like hours. She'd burned her bridges, challenged the institutional hierarchy, and demanded recognition based solely on merit. Either it would work, or her military career was effectively over. When she was called back in, Captain Hayes looked exhausted. Petty Officer Martinez, against our better judgment, and contrary to standard procedures, we're prepared to recommend you for the next available SEAL training class, beginning in 6 months. Sarah felt her knees nearly buckle with relief, but she maintained her military bearing. However, Hayes continued sternly. You will receive no special accommodations, no modified standards, and no additional chances. You will succeed or fail on exactly the same terms as every other candidate. Is that understood? Perfectly understood, sir. And Martinez, Chief Stone added, his voice carrying a warning. You better be as good as you think you are. Because if you fail, it won't just be your career that suffers. It will set back opportunities for other women for years to come. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. Chief, I proved today that I am exactly as good as I think I am. I'll prove it again during training. As Sarah left the debriefing room, she walked past Morrison and the other support personnel who were waiting for their own evaluations. Morrison looked at her with curiosity and something approaching respect. How did it go, he asked. Sarah paused, considering her answer. It went exactly as it should have. 3 months later, Sarah received her official orders for SEAL training. But the real victory had happened in that debriefing room, when she'd refused to accept anything less than what she'd earned. The silence that had followed her demand for equal treatment was not the silence of defeat, but the silence of an institution forced to confront its own limitations. 6 months after that extraordinary day on the island, Sarah Martinez began SEAL training as part of Class 234. She was the first woman to be accepted based purely on demonstrated performance rather than policy requirements or political considerations. The 100 targets she'd conquered had become a metaphor for something larger. The barriers that could be broken when skill met determination and refused to accept compromise. The SEALs had given her one try, thinking it would be enough to prove she didn't belong. Instead, her 93 hits out of 100 targets had spoken louder than any argument, clearer than any policy debate, and more convincingly than any political directive. In the end, their silence said everything. When faced with undeniable excellence, even the most resistant institutions must eventually yield to the truth that courage and skill recognize no boundaries except those we create in our own minds. Sarah Martinez had shattered those boundaries with precision, determination, and the absolute refusal to accept anything less than what she'd earned. The sound of 100 targets falling was just the beginning of a much larger conversation about what it truly means to be the best of the best.